Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight we're going to talk about a subject that we've covered 8 times on this program in the last 10 years, the Kingsbridge Armory. To start, I'm going to show you some photos that will likely make tonight's guests cringe. They go back as far as 2012, 10 years ago, as New York Ranger legend Mark Messier and his partners stood with Bronx elected officials promising to construct the Kingsbridge National Ice Center at the Kingsbridge Armory. And then he was on our program, as you can see there. But despite crafting an historic community benefits agreement, the project never happened, largely because investors couldn't come up with enough funding to make it happen. And now, many in the neighboring Bronx communities are pleased to say it's a new day and a new future for the Kingsbridge Armory that has stood inviting but vacant for decades. So tonight we're going to get into the Kingsbridge Armory and how, with the full backing of the city's Economic Development Corporation, Kingsbridge communities are working to develop this historic structure into something meaningful and impactful for the people of the Bronx. So please join me in welcoming from City Hall on Skype the president of the city's EDC. It is Andrew Kimball. Mr. Kimball, nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we certainly appreciate your support of this project, and we're going to talk a lot about it. Here in our studio from the NWBCC, the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, the organization that is taking a lead in crafting the Armory plan, Sandra Lobo. Ms. Lobo, nice to have you with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Kimball, let's start with you, and let's just get an idea. Why is the EDC taking this so seriously, and what are the opportunities that you see here that were not able to be realized by what is now a dead plan to turn it into an ice center?
Well, it's an extraordinary asset, first of all. A 200,000 square foot drill hall with 100-foot high ceilings, column-free, 6 floors beneath it, a spectacularly beautiful facility that has been a meaningful landmark in the community for many, many years, but as you well point out, something which has mostly led to frustration around redevelopment in the past. So, we're thrilled to be turning a new page here. Part of the reason we're so enthusiastic about it is the incredible leadership at the local level. Councilmember Parina Sanchez, who is co-chairing with Sandra Lobo, who's on your show with me today, and thrilled to share this program with her, who are co-chairing a community-led task force to really help us vision the next generation for Kingsbridge Armory.
Do you have objectives in your mind right now? I know you don't want to speak for the communities, and that's why we have the community here, but do you have objectives that would make the EDC say, I like this idea, this is what we want to do? Like, what do you have in your mind, without going at the moment into specifics of what could be in there, but what would you like to see the development turn into?
Right. Well, core mission for EDC is creating jobs, particularly jobs in sectors that make sense for today and tomorrow, that pay well, that create pathways, real independence for folks. And we want projects that are shaped by the communities that they're in, informed by the communities that they're in, and become real assets long term. So that means finding private partners who are prepared to engage and create relationships at the local level, and career pathway opportunities for folks in and around the Kingsbridge Armory site.
Well, let's turn to Ms. Lobo, who's here with me in the studio. When you hear him talking like that, that's got to be music to your ears. We were just talking beforehand about the involvement of you and NWBCC for many years, even well before the Ice Center project. What's so compelling about the opportunity here for you and the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was sharing earlier that one of my first involvements with the Northwest Bronx was in the late 90s when I was a college student, and now my daughter's in college. It gives you a sense of how long this process has been. I really appreciate what Andrew shared in terms of the economic priorities of the EDC. I think jobs, first and foremost, are really a priority for us. That's really the floor. We see the Kingsbridge Armory as the potential to be catalytic to transforming the local economy. And so for us, it has to go beyond jobs. It's about how do we build shared ownership and shared wealth for the people who live in the Bronx today.
And you have engaged in a pretty serious process here. I mean, there's a couple of charts. There is that website, which is kingsbridgetogether.com. But the Kingsbridge Armory visioning process has some pretty clearly laid out steps. What is the process here? And as you know, I attended one of the visioning sessions and got to see what people are thinking and saying. But how do you see it? And how does the Kingsbridge Armory Community Working Group see this leading up to a solution as to what actually will be in there?
Yeah. So I have the opportunity to co-chair the community working group with the Councilwoman Piedina Sanchez and working with the EDC, and we've pulled together critical stakeholders from the area. So we're looking at faith institutions, labor, community-based organizations, cultural institutions, and that is the working group that is really coming together to ensure that the local community is, as Andrew mentioned, an important voice in this process. And so the meeting that you're referring to in November was really around grounding ourselves in values and principles that should determine and guide this process and ultimately what the project is. The next meeting that we have in January is going to be really thinking about feasibility and what's possible in this building.
What are those? Give us a couple of those principles that you heard from people there. And then we're going to ask Mr. Kimball really about collecting all that information and how they operate and they accrue everything that comes out. So what are the principles that you heard from your colleagues in the community?
Absolutely. A lot of them are very similar to things that we named last time. So local hire, local procurement.
Well, that jobs thing keeps coming up, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think folks are really concerned around health and wellness. Obviously, given who we are here in the Bronx as the least healthy county in the state. But we also saw some new values and principles that weren't there last time, and that is really thinking about community ownership and what does it look like to have a project that is investing in that particular way.
Fascinating. Mr. Kimball, let's talk about this whole idea of the visioning process, and there is a questionnaire that's going out there. You can see what the timeline looks like, and the next public workshop will be in January. You're putting out these surveys. Do you do this all the time, or are we just special here in the Bronx? I mean, and then what do you do with that information? I mean, you can get a lot of data, but it's got to be turned into something useful, palatable. Talk to me a little bit about that process.
Well, the Bronx, and especially Kingsbridge, is special.
There you go. No argument in this room, I promise you.
This is a process that we have used across the city, where we have a city-owned asset that we're trying to repurpose or develop a site. And it's absolutely critical that we have a community visioning process and the kind of leadership that Sandra and the council member are providing. But there were over 200 people who participated in the first session. We expect we'll continue to have that kind of engagement. And the resulting document, the vision document, will really be our marching orders for how we prepare a request for proposals that we hope to get out towards the end of next year, and how we go about selecting a development partner to take on this project. Why do you need a development partner? You need a development partner because generally, if you really want to drive job creation, you need a private sector partner who can bring those jobs to the site, bring businesses, or have an idea of how to work with the community to generate business activity, but who will also bring private investment. This will be a very, very expensive project. Undoubtedly, there will need to be significant public funds allocated to it, but we'll also need private investment. And the community's process does not end at the visioning document. We're going to remain engaged with the community and the leadership throughout the selection process, so that we come out on the other end with hopefully a private sector partner who is locked arm in arm with the community from day one.
One of the things that characterized the previous iteration was the Community Benefits Agreement, which was hailed as an historic one, talking about jobs and wages and jobs, talking about things as specific as no sugar drinks being sold in the arena, and all those. There were so many things in there. Even dedicated community space was part of it. Were you satisfied with that? If somebody said, "Here's the CBA," would you say that's the one we want, or do you look at the potential now that a new agreement has to be crafted and say, "Well, that was good, but we want to do this"? That's for you, Mr. Kimball. And then we'll ask Ms. Lobo the same thing.
Community benefits agreements have evolved over the years. I have no doubt that there will be a version of that for this project. Again, that will be informed largely by the community vision document that they produce and the conversations that ensue with the private development partner who gets selected through the RFP process. At the end of the day, though, the most important thing is that we select a project that is financially viable. And unfortunately, that was not the case the last time around.
You know, what people who are cynical in the Bronx communities for very good reasons will say, you know what, every time we do this, we come up with something really good, and then it goes to City Hall or their powers that be, and they never really listen to us anyway. Sounds to me like, and giving you credit, that you're ready to do a lot of listening, because you're not giving us specifics. The specifics you're giving us are you want the community to create this, right? Do I have that right?
100%. We are really looking to their leadership right now to shape what this request for proposals will look like that we put out on the private market.
Ms. Lobo, let's just ask you about that CBA. That was put together and negotiated with a lot of community leaders, maybe even NWBCC was involved in it. Were you satisfied with that? Do you say, wow, let's get that same one and we'll sign off, or do you have something else, or do you want to get a whole fresh look? How do you view a potential community benefits agreement? Yeah,
so the Northwest Bronx was responsible for convening all of the various partners in the coalition that negotiated that community benefits agreement. And you know, we're definitely very proud of what we won. It was legally binding, it was historic, it was precedent setting. And we were excited for that project because of what the developer was willing to bring to the table. With that said, I think there were also some disappointment that the community didn't get to develop and design what the project actually ultimately was. And so today that CBA is 10 years old. I think that's
and unused essentially.
That's the floor, and not actually I think what it would be satisfactory for us today. So again, I hate to beat the same drum, but really we're thinking about how do you build investment in Bronx businesses. How do you invest in the people of the Bronx beyond jobs? Jobs, of course, are on the table. We want to work with labor and make sure that jobs are at the center. But today, in 2022, with our economy, and given what's going on that's different from 10 years ago, socially, economically, and politically, we believe that the project, the vision for the project has to reflect the current needs and assets of the Bronx and has to leverage ownership for people in the Bronx.
I'm just looking at my notes and the many different attempts over the years. Local opposition in 2000 stopped a redevelopment plan that didn't include schools. And then if I'm remembering correctly, the notion that was like, well, we want schools in there because at that time the whole notion of overcrowding was there.
Right.
But ultimately it was determined that schools couldn't be in there because there weren't sufficient windows, and that of course is a requirement for schools. Right. Is that the kind of educational project we could have? Do you see schools in there, or is that really, even if people want it, it's not going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certain parameters, and Andrew, I'll lean on you to give more of the specifics, but there are limits to what the project can take. So, we're looking at both schools and housing really are not on the table given the landmark historic designation of the building and what would be needed to make that happen. Right now it's zoned for commercial, but we anticipate that there's a possibility of getting it rezoned for light manufacturing. So that's something that we're looking at.
How do you see, and you've mentioned it twice now, the notion of Bronx investment in it and Bronx businesses benefiting? What framework? I know you don't want to dictate to the community what they might want to see. How would that work? People, Bronx companies getting the construction jobs. I mean, how do you vision that coming true if you had your way on this project, aside from listening to what the community says?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm here to share is what we've heard already from the community. And I think there's precedent for this. We can look at other development projects, either here in New York City or others across the country, where you are putting together economic development projects that are building worker co-ops, that are supporting local businesses that have the opportunity to scale with the right kind of investment. And with the parameters of the Kingsbridge Armory and the desires that the community has named, we really see the opportunity to have mixed use, right? So you could have potential advanced manufacturing, for example. 5 acres, for goodness sakes.
That's right. And it's so large.
Yeah.
Immense. I mean, there's many possibilities. Mr. Kimball, I got a tour of the facility, actually from the Hemick people way back. I'm assuming you've been through it. The one thing that people see if they walk by or they've opened up and they know that Will Smith did a movie in there and there was all kinds of stuff going on in there. They know there's that big 5 gymnasium-sized floor in there. But I was surprised to learn of all the stuff that was underneath that. There was a whole series of locker rooms, and there was like a whole causeway. I mean, I envisioned putting in, something like they have in Grand Central Station with all Bronx businesses, to have a full shopping district in there. What is in that building, aside from the drill floor, Mr. Kimball, that you think could be useful in helping people realize the potential that's here?
Well, certainly the floors beneath the drill floor can be utilized. We've got to figure out to what extent, and we've got an engineering firm looking at that right now. I think there's an extraordinary opportunity here to have multiple uses. You have to have an anchor use, I believe, and job creator. But there's no question that you could have a range of businesses within the building, many of which hopefully will meet the goals and aspirations that Sandra laid out. I also think you can have academic collaborations there. I'm not talking about moving a school there necessarily, but I believe integrating DOE collaborations and particularly CUNY collaborations into a site around, particularly when they're innovation jobs of today and the future. We want to make sure that our young people have access to those jobs, and there's something critically important to co-locating those academic uses with where the jobs and businesses are. And that's a theme that's going to pervade every major economic development project that Mayor Adams undertakes, this administration undertakes. We just launched, as an example, a life sciences campus at Kips Bay that's going to have 3 CUNY schools embedded in the site, right next to 750,000 square feet of private biotech space, lab space, and 2 city agencies focused on public health. So there's a way to think creatively about how we use all those spaces to create an ecosystem that really creates the kind of career pathways and local opportunities that I think we all want.
Of course, the Kingsbridge Armory is at the tail end of what is known as Education Row in the Bronx. And you won't have to go very far to find a CUNY school that likely would want to collaborate. Of course, our studios are here at Lehman College. I want to ask you just another question about the construction. And one thing I learned when I did take that tour, there's an asbestos issue in that building that clearly is going to have to be one of the issues that's dealt with head on. I mean, we don't want anybody in there. Is there something you can tell us just about the nature of getting the building to a point where you can actually talk about putting other stuff in there, putting up walls or whatever else?
Well, it's a fundamental issue. Sorry for the cough.
That's all right.
like any old structure of that era, there is asbestos in the building. We are actually right now designing a remediation plan that will deal with that. It will have to happen on every floor going down all 6. And that'll just be the beginning of the kind of remedial work that we'll have to do to have the basic infrastructure and bones of the building be ready for private investment.
Ms. Lobo, let's just talk a little bit about ultimately, and we'll ask Mr. Kimball to follow that up as well. So you get all this information. You get all these people. Now, will you set up committees and things like that? Do you envision that in the next steps? But then ultimately, who says this is what's going to be there? You know what I'm saying? In other words, when I was looking at 200 people at that event, I was like, everybody's got Bronx people. We all got something to say. I'm ready to tell you what I think. But then who says this is a good idea? Or, as Mr. Kimball is partially suggesting, we're going to need a developer. Somebody's got to choose that developer. How do you see that playing out in terms of this visioning process?
I mean, from our perspective, we believe the community will ultimately decide, right? We've worked together since February to pull together guiding values and principles. And so whatever development project proposals kind of get submitted in response to the RFP, we want to take a look at them and compare them to the guiding values and principles. Do they build community ownership? Do they build local jobs? Is it good wages?
And that's based, if I can interrupt, that's based on the values that you're going to hear from the community, that's what they want.
Right.
So in other words, they talk about this, but you mentioned that healthcare was a big thing. Not necessarily that we're going to build a hospital, but maybe we could do things that will help develop people healthfully, maybe athletic events or things like that. So those are the check marks that you're going to want to put in there. I'm just looking at the size of it. I'll tell you what I think. This is what I think. I'd love to see some kind of arena that is a multi-purpose arena that just we can bring all the basketball teams in. We can play tennis. We can do all those. This is just Gary's point of view. And then on that floor below it, boy, I'd love to see a market and take all those people who are selling right outside the Kingsbridge Armory, legitimize them, give them businesses, and let them sell their wares and real good food, healthy food on the inside. That's Gary's point of view. Put that down on my forum.
I'm taking notes.
You're taking notes? All right, very good. It's on the record now. You're going to do that, and then ultimately sit down with developers and find out who can do this best and say, what do you guys say? I just want to get a little more articulation on how it's going to work so people will understand that.
EDC will have their process of deciphering and the metrics of who will get kind of move forward and who doesn't. I think from our perspective, the community has a say in it too, right? We can use our political power and making clear what the community wants to either make this a success or not. And we're really excited about how things have gone thus far, and really there has felt like a very intentional collaboration in making sure that happens.
Yeah, the council speaker is behind you and behind Councilmember Sanchez. We should mention that the council member was going to join us. It got too busy down in City Hall, and I think we can all understand that, and she couldn't carve out the time to join us. But her support mirrors what you're saying in terms of the community should determine. Mr. Kimball, let's just start wrapping this up. Timeline. How long does it take to make a decision? I mean, RFPs sometimes sit there forever. How long does it take to put out the RFPs that are going to be involved in this, or even get it to the point where you can do an RFP? And then, boy, the construction, it's got to take a little while, no?
It's going to take a little while, but you got to get it right, and the work on the front end is so critical to that. So there's going to be about 6 months for the community visioning process. Once that wraps up, there'll be a report that they deliver that will help guide the RFP that will go out next year. That then will need to be a period of time to evaluate those RFPs. As Sandra said, to have strong community input. I can I can say this, like, we are not going to have a successful project if we don't have an outcome where the RFP respondent at the end of the day is locked arm in arm with the community. And if they're not, we're not going to have a successful project. Right. So that's the simple outcome. You then have to go into full-blown design and then construction. So you're looking at several years until you have a brand new re-envisioned Kingsbridge Armory.
We're certainly looking forward to that. You know, I'm just impatient. I'm like, I'm ready to, let's do it, you know. Ms. Lobo, just to let you conclude, this is an important project for NWBCC, and it reflects everything that you've been doing. Just talk about your organization and why this is exactly the right thing for you and your colleagues to throw themselves into. Absolutely. Wholeheartedly.
Thank you. We've been organizing around the Kingsbridge Armory for almost 30 years. And we've learned a lot through that time around, you know, what does it mean to really be community-led and to think about community and economic development that is fully reflective of supporting the local community. So our organization works on racial justice and economic democracy. We organize around housing, health, economic development, education. And the Kingsbridge Armory really is the
all of
asset.
the above.
It's all of the above. You can do all of those things. That's right.
And so for people who want to say, hey, wait a minute, I want to tell you what I think, because you only had 200 people there. We got 1.4 million in the borough. How do they get to you, and what are they doing? I'm going to ask Mr. Kimball the same thing.
They can reach us on our website, www.northwestbronx.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have you join our next meeting. Kingsbridgetogether.com
is another website. Mr. Kimball, for people who say, well, wait a minute, we don't want the EDC to be so far away from us, tell us how can they have input on this project and say, hey, this is what I think, as Bronxites definitely want to do.
Well, part of that is having the website so they can reach us that way as well. Part of it is having our folks on the ground for every one of these visioning sessions. I am confident that this process will bear the fruits of what, you know, the majority of the leadership on the local level wants to see.
Great. Mr. Kimball, thank you so much. Andrew Kimball, President and CEO of EDC. This kind of interaction is vital to have a successful project and also to have a successful TV show. And we appreciate your time this evening. And Sandra Lobo, I'll see you around town.
Definitely.
Right?
Thank you.
All right. And listen, I've got just a tremendous staff, Rebecca and Nick and the cast of thousands who work with us here in the studio. We get it done every week. And next week, we should have a really exciting show. We're going to have the Green Bronx Machine here with us next week. We might even have a group of kids in the room watching the TV show. That will be interesting. And we'll see you then. Happy holidays, everybody.